Good morning, everyone. My name is Prashant. I'm a third year grad student here. I'm very interested in open source software, and I recently started learning this tool to draw my figures for posters and papers. So I decided to share my knowledge with you all so everyone can get started easily. So, what does Inkscape do? So, if you have used something like MS Paint before, you use a pencil tool and you draw lines around, and you can use tools to draw squares and circles. All of those things are stored as the values of the pixels. So if I take a photograph and I divide the photograph into very tiny bits, each bit is assigned a value for the color. So let's go and look at some example of something that is not a vector. So it's called a raster. So if I open an image here and I zoom into it, I can see that this blue thing is made up of these tiny pixel values, and each of them has a color, and if you can see, the changing color takes you into another field of a different color. So when we are zoomed out, we don't really know that the picture is made up of tiny pixels, but when I zoom in, I can know. So if I open a vector image now, I made this in Inkscape. I'll show you how to make it soon, but it opens up in a different software. So right now it opens up in any web browser, Internet Explorer, for example. So if I zoom in, I can zoom in infinitely, and I do not see those pixel boxes. You can zoom into another part of the image as well. And Internet Explorer only supports this much zoom, but you can zoom infinitely in theory, which we will do shortly in Inkscape. So what is the difference between the Inkscape image and this image? So the way the image is stored is totally different. It is stored in terms of mathematical equations. So the way you draw things is more or less similar, but the way it is stored in the back end is very different. So if you open up Inkscape, we can get started by drawing simple things. So the flow of the talk would be I would show you how to use the pencil tool and then how to draw very basic curves, which is using a tool called Bezier curves. It is the bread and butter of Inkscape. So once we learn how to draw simple shapes, then I'll show you how to take this image that we have here. So the image that I just showed, I'll show you how to take a raster image like this and then trace it into a vector. So there are multiple ways to do that. We'll go over that for a long time. And then I'll teach you some extra features of how to change colors of things and how to edit shapes and some new ways to merge shapes, doing Boolean operations of union, intersection, things like that. So that would be the outline of my talk. So I just opened up Inkscape, and I see that there is a canvas here, and there's area around it. So technically, I can draw or write things anywhere I want, either in the canvas or outside it. But when I save this document, the ones inside this will be displayed in my Internet Explorer. That's the only difference between the outside canvas and the inside. So there are multiple ways to zoom into this canvas. There are shortcuts. If I press 1, I zoom in. If I press 2, I zoom out. I think 5 sets the whole canvas into the zoom. And if I draw any objects and I press 3, it zooms into the object. So if I draw a square, it zoomed into the square now. So if I press 5, I go back to the large view. So to get started, if I use, so you need to use the mouse extensively in Inkscape. If you go scroll up or scroll down, it goes up and down. But if I hold the shift key and do the same, it moves left and right. If I press control and do that, it zooms in and out. Let's press 5 again. So this is how you move around in Inkscape. There is a bunch of tools here in the left, the tool bar it's called, and anytime I press a tool, the top segment here, it changes. So depending on the tool that I press, the options that it gives here are the specific ways of tweaking your tool. So for example, if I draw a circle, there are ways that I can change this circle into something else. I don't know why this option does not work. Okay, so if I draw a square, I get an option to do rounded corners, something like this. So for the circle, I have an option to do other stuff. So that is the ones here that you see. So you can make it a Pac-Man, you can make it an ellipse, and if I remove this area here, you will only see the outline. So you will know the difference between this and that. But all these, the top bar is for changing the options for the specific tool that you select, the controls for the tools. And in the bottom here, you can see that there's a color palette. So very simply, I go to the select tool, select whatever object I want. If I click here, I change the color of the object. If I shift and click any particular thing, I change the outline, the border of the object. So if I zoom in, I can see the border changing. So shift click blue, shift click red, the border changes. So these are the uses for the color palette here. So whenever I select any object, you can see below the color palette, it shows you so there's a sentence that says what you have selected and some special options. So if I press Control, it shows extra options, Shift, Alt. So depending on what I press, it shows you extra options. So this is also useful for this demo. So if I'm pressing any button here, actually the bottom segment will tell you which button I'm pressing. Okay, that looks good. So we have covered the basics of how to navigate around this area. Another thing I wish to do before we move on is when I select an object here, I can click on the object and it forms this dotted line around it, and there is these arrows that will let me move in and out, so it will let me scale. And if I press Control, so Control is a Superman button in Inkscape. If I press Control, it has a lot of special rules. So right now I can just move it in arbitrary thing, in an arbitrary way, but if I press Control, it will constrain the aspect ratio of the image. So I can't change the height without changing the width at the same time. So it's a very useful feature. If I click on this again, the arrows change and this one looks like it's going to rotate the image. So that's what it does. It rotates the image, and if I press Control, it constrains the rotations. So if I want to rotate perfect 90 degrees, I would want to hold the Control button. So once I select an object, whether it's in the rotate mode or in the scale mode, I can just click on it and move it around. So if an object is totally covering another object below it, I can press Alt and click on it and it will select the object below. But if I try to move, it will still move the object above because it has reselected the other object. So the goal is to, if you want to move the yellow circle, press Alt and select the yellow circle, then keep pressing Alt and then move the yellow circle. So that's how it works. And another special feature in the rotation mode is you can see the plus here, that is the axis of rotation. If I move it into another place, it changes the axis of rotation of the image. And if I want it to go back to the original place, I can also put it here and show the same thing. If I shift click the plus, it goes back to the original place. So that's a good option. So let's get rid of these three things. The way I select multiple objects is just you can shift click multiple individual objects, or you can just drag a lasso around them. There's another feature to select objects. So if I Alt and draw a line cutting through objects, it will just select the object that I cut through. So if you're zoomed in and you can't draw a square around your objects, you can use the Alt and cut through them. So I delete all of these. So now let's move to the pencil tool. Just a minute. Yeah. So can anyone spot the pencil tool here? It is the one that looks like a pencil, obviously. And every time you hover above on the tool, you will see the shortcut for the tool right in the brackets there. So you don't need to remember. If you keep using it, you will know the tools, the shortcut for the tools, and it's easier to access them. So to access the selecting the selection, it's F1. So I'll keep using that during the tutorial. So I select the tool. Let's try writing some text. I'm writing Inkscape here. You can see that the lines are very smooth, and the reason for that is when I use this tool before, I have preset this attribute of smoothness here. So the default is actually very low, which is 1. So if I write Inkscape now, let's write ink. You can see that the lines are very irregular. But if I increase the smoothness, there is this sweet spot where right here, yeah. So it looks like I've been using a stylus and writing on the touch screen, right? So that the reason for this uh, very smooth lines is because this we have changed the smoothness setting here. So that is the best feature of a pencil tool. We rarely use a pencil tool in Inkscape unless you're really freehand drawing something. There are some other options for creating paths which are also rarely used. Let me just show you a spiral path. It just changes the path in such a way that it becomes like a spiral. And there's another option where so it draws a line as if, so it uses the nodes that I draw as a bounding box for the shape itself. So these are the options in the pencil tool. There's also some effects that you can use with the pencil tool. Let's look at this thing called oval. So if I use the ellipse effect, and I do the same thing, I write Inkscape. You can see if I zoom in, you can see that the starting of the stroke is thinner and the end of the stroke is thinner than the middle, which is very thick. So this is exactly how an oval looks like. So if I draw a straight line, you can clearly see that you can clearly see the oval effect here. So this is what is used when you draw a stroke with the pencil. So let's have a practice here. I'll give you a minute. Everyone try writing your name with whichever setting you like the best and try playing with the smoothness. Alright, let's move on. So I will just select everything on the screen using Control A. It selects all, and I just press delete, and I'll press 5 to zoom into the canvas again. So let's inspect this, the main tool of Inkscape, which is Bezier curves. The shortcut is Shift and F6. So I'll just try using the shortcut now. So if I press Shift F6, I bring up this ink pen like tool, and what it does is in a basic sense, it plots nodes, and if I click and drag, each node has a tangent around it. So I'll just complete a shape by going back to the initial point. So let's if I press escape within any tool, I go back to the select tool here. So that's a very neat shortcut. So let's say I'm in the pen tool here, the Bezier tool. If I press escape multiple times, I go to the selection tool. Another shortcut is if I press spacebar, it goes to the selection tool, and if I press it again, it goes back to the previous tool I was using. So this is also a very handy shortcut. So if I double click on this, I see the second option right now, which is edit paths by node. So you can see the nodes, and if I click on a particular node, you can see the slope of that node. So this is how Inkscape sees every object that you draw. It sees it as a bunch of nodes, and there's lines connecting the nodes, and depending on the slope of the line at the left and the right, so for this node there's a different slope on the left and right, that's why it's a sharp edge. Same with all of these, but for this point the slope on the left is same as the slope on the right, so it is a smooth edge. So if I select only one of these and change it, the other one is also changing, if you notice. So that is because, so when I select this node and go, so if I want to convert it to a sharp node, I can go on the top here and click on make selected nodes corner. Now if you see, the shape of the node has changed. So if I press Ctrl Z, I'll go back. So this is a square looking node. So the square looking node is a smooth node, and a diamond looking node is a corner node. So where the left slope can be different from the right slope now. Alright. So let's go over some very simple shapes that we can draw with this. I'll just delete this one. I'll select the Bezier tool. Let's just draw a rectangle. So I draw a node, and if I press Ctrl, it constrains my slope that I can make. So I keep pressing Ctrl, I can make perfect right angles with this. Then if I double click anywhere, it will just close the shape. So if I want to draw only a part of it, I can double click there and it will stop drawing the shape. And if you see, if you don't click anything else, it will keep drawing new objects. So if you press spacebar, it will go to the selection tool. So let's double click this, it will go to the node editing tool. If you zoom in, you can see that this node is not perfectly straight. So if I press Ctrl and move any object, it moves in a straight line, either horizontally or vertically. So I can move and make it into a rectangle. Another way to draw a perfect rectangle is to turn on what are called grid lines. You can see that there's a ruler in this around the canvas. So if I press, the shortcut for it is so I'll show you where it exists. So if you go to view and then page grid, the shortcut is the hash, because it looks like a grid. So you can use this to draw a perfect rectangle. So I go back to this tool, I can draw each node at one of these corners. So this is a perfect rectangle, and anytime you want high precision, if you want segments of measured lengths or stuff, you can make use of this grid lines. So if you press the same shortcut again, which is the hash button, you take them away. So when we're talking about these precision, there's another way to get precision. So there's this option called edit. Okay, so it should be an object, and yeah, so the shortcut for this is percentage key. So if I press percent, there are multiple options here that get turned on. So those are called snapping, enable snapping. So when I enable that, what it does is, when I try moving around any object, it tries snapping it to the nearest corner. Yeah, see, so that's how it works. So I can snap this to right neighboring of the other one. I can snap this to be here to make a perfect shape. So if I want to turn it off, sometimes it's annoying, sometimes I want to draw freehand, so I just turn off snapping. So we have drawn straight edges with this, but how do I, if I want to draw a curved line, how do I determine the slope of the line that I'm drawing? So if I click and just move away from the point. It is showing me the line segment that's going to be between this point and wherever I'm going to click next, the next point. So it is sure shot going to be a straight line, right? But what I can do here is I can, if I click and drag here without clicking and leaving, I can make a point where I determine the slope of the point. And it's going to be a smooth edge, so the slope on the top is same as the slope on the bottom. So if I release it, it's going to leave a point there, but then it's going to make the slope on the other side as well. So I make a curve right now. So if I go here and I click and leave, I make a straight edge. So I click and leave again and click and leave again. I make something that looks like a semicircle, I would say. I move these points around a little bit and I change the slope. So we have made a semicircle, right? A sector of a circle, I'm sorry. So if I want to make a semicircle, I just go here, click here, an imperfect semicircle. But if I want a perfect semicircle, more or less, this is not the best way to draw a semicircle, but just to learn how to draw curved segments. So how about this? Let's open up this example document here. It's called practice template. Oh, if I just open it, it will open it in the viewer. This is Internet Explorer. If I right click and say Inkscape, it opens it in a new window in Inkscape. Alright. So I have a few templates here in blue colored. What I want you to do is to use this Bezier drawing tool. For now, let's try to make a 1 and a 2. I'll give you a minute for each. So a 1 is simple, it has all straight edges. So if I go here, click, click, click and click, and then double click here to end the shape, you have made a 1. Press spacebar, I will be able to see it clearly. So now I want to make a 2. So you click, and at the second thing you want to make a curve. You make a curve, you want it to come back, and you want a sharp edge, right? Something that approximately looks like a 2. So let's try and make a 3. But while before doing this, so let's try and make a 3. So once I make this shape, let's say I want to edit some nodes. So we go to the node editing tool. We can move around nodes, and if I press Ctrl, I can constrain the movement of the node. I can change the slope of each node. I can make a particular node either smooth or a corner node by using those options. There's also other things to make nodes symmetric and other stuff as well, which you can explore later. So using this knowledge of editing nodes, try and make a 8 shape and a 9 shape. So I'll teach you a shortcut to make the 8 shape. So I select the 3, and if I flip it over, then and I join both the mirror images, it should look like an 8, right? So let's try duplicating this first. So the shortcut is either I control C, control V somewhere else, or if I press control D, it duplicates the object. And now the duplicate is on top of the current object. If I move it, and there's an option to flip objects horizontally, right now it looks like an imperfect 8. If I want to draw an 8 from scratch, it's pretty simple. So you just like you drew a 3, try to use as little nodes as possible so you get a more perfect shape. So that was an imperfect 8, but let's try drawing it again. So I use 1 2, this is the third node I'm using, fourth node. So this is a circle 8 with only 4 nodes. And you can adjust these slopes for making a more perfect looking shape, which I will do right now. So if you want to make this node a smooth node, select it, go to smooth node, and smooth. So that's how you would draw any shape. So let's try adding some color to these shapes. So if I want to color the inside of this, I can either just go here and use the shortcut. If I use these shortcuts, I make these colors, or I can change the color of the border by pressing shift. I zoom in, I can see. But there's another way to fine tune colors. So the colors that are not on the palette, if you want to control them, so you need to go to this toolbar which is called fill and stroke. So it should be in edit. No, sorry, object, fill and stroke. So the first thing that comes up is the fill. So we have already filled this 8, so it shows you the RGB values. There are also other ways to think about this, like hue, saturation, and lightness. There's multiple color schemes that you can draw in. So if you want to change this color, you can change it. If you want to be precise, you can also type in the values. And there's also transparency here. I can adjust how transparent this is. So if I take this, put it on top of another shape, you will know what transparency means. Okay, so that is how to edit the fill. If I want to edit the stroke color, I can go here and change it to whatever I want. The key thing here is editing the stroke style. So if I go here, I can increase the thickness. So I can make it 0.5. I can make it 1. And the units is millimeters, which is the same units as all the other things here, as well as the scale bar. So if I make the line thicker, you can see that it is thicker than before. I'll change it to black so it looks good. There's also other things you can do. You can make it a dashed line, dotted line. Many options here, you can play with it. So what if I want to make an arrow? I make a straight line or a curved line. So let's make a curved line. And I want an arrow head to be in this place. So the way I do it is, if I go to stroke style, there's markers for the beginning, middle, and the end. I can just select arrow. It looks very small here, so let's increase the width and be able to see clearly. You can see the arrow clearly. There's multiple styles of arrows that you can use. You can go ahead and explore all that later. But this is the easiest way. So if I'm trying to make an explanation for this object, so I just draw an arrow and I make the marker this thing. Let's increase the width. And then I can type a text here saying that this is an 8. So the option for that is the text toolbar here. That's the best way to label stuff using this arrow feature on Inkscape. So let's go ahead and explore some other stuff. So I've showed you how to flip things horizontally, vertically. I won't go over that again. But if I select any particular object, so let's just draw a simple object here. And if you notice, each object that I draw is following the last properties of fill, stroke, and width that I used. So that's how it works in Inkscape. Every color change and everything that you do applies to the next objects that you draw. So I select this. You can see that it has an, if you go to the select option and the top control toolbar, you'll see that there's an x, y coordinate and there's a width height. So this is providing the x and y coordinate of the first point of this. So the x is from this, y is from here. So if I change this to 0, 0, it goes to the beginning of the canvas. You can see that. I can also change the width and height of this triangle manually. Yeah, so I can do many things like that. There's another thing I can do. Let me try and color this triangle here. So if I select the triangle, go to fill, color it something, you can see that all the triangles below it are also changing color. And the reason for that is this, these two triangles are clones of this. So if I select this, it says it's a clone of something else. So this is also a clone of something else. Whereas if I select this, it's a path. So these two are not independent objects as of themselves, but these are clones of this. So if I change this, if I scale this, these objects get scaled. If I rotate this, then these objects get rotated. If I change the color or anything, everything gets propagated. So if I want to draw a complex schematic where I have repetitive copies of one thing, and let's say tomorrow I decide to change the color or something. If I make them clones, I can just make a change in one and it will prop up to all the clones of that object. That's a very useful feature. And the way I clone this is, so let's have this this rectangle here. I can press the shortcut Alt and D to make a clone of that object. So this is a clone of this rectangle. So if I change the stroke style here, the other one as well changes. So that's how you make clones. So the dialog box where you would find this is edit a clone. So create a clone is a simple thing. There's also other things you can do. Create tiled clones. So if I, let's try to make it different. So if I draw a circle, I press Ctrl, then it draws a circle of regular dimensions. If I don't, I can draw an ellipse. So let's just draw a circle. I don't like pink, so let's make it green. Alright, so I want to clone this circle in a straight line. I want 5 circles like that in a straight line here. So how would I do that? So edit, there's clone, and there's other options below clone. So create tile clones. It's a complex thing. I'm saying I want 5 rows of circles and 1 column. And if I say create, it creates a row, basically creates 1 column of circles for me. And all of these are clones. So if I change the color here, propagates to all of them. And if you see, if you wonder why this one is darker than the others, there's also an identical clone that's placed on top of the object. So that's why it looks. So this is the original, this is the clone which we can delete. So we need 5 objects, we have 5 objects in our one. This is the best way to clone multiple objects in specific symmetry order. There's also other things you can do. You can draw spirals of cloned objects, anything. Inkscape has a lot of potential. Alright, so this segment is done. So let's open up a new document. We can close this. Don't need to save it unless you want to take it home and practice more with it. It's a good idea, probably, but I won't save it now. Alright, so the next segment, the next half of the talk would be how do I take this bitmap image that I see here and convert it into a vector. What I want to do is, let's just import this as a raster. It will ask me whether it has to embed this thing or link, just have a hyperlink for that thing. So just the default parameter should be fine. If it's too small, you can always make it bigger. Hold control and you'll preserve aspect ratio. Let's make it as big as the screen, or we can just press 3 to zoom in. So this is the image. If I go to object, okay, so it's in path. So if I say path, trace bitmap, it will open up a dialog box for me, and there's multiple options here. But before, alright, so let's continue with this. So there's multiple options here, so you can, and if you press, there's a preview option here, so it will show you what it will look like. So how does Inkscape look at this object as a vector? So it is trying to approximate all these colors and shapes and boundaries in this image and tries to make a vector of that. So right now it's using brightness. The red is the brightest region and green, I think. You can change the threshold here, make it really low, I guess. And it doesn't draw anything. If you make it too high, then it will catch everything. So this object is not good. So not all the features have enough difference of brightness. Let's try detecting edges. This is what it does. If I ask it to detect colors, it will do that. So it's detecting colors that are brighter, so the dark sides here are getting detected. So if I invert the image, it will detect everything that's in black is the one that's being drawn. It can also draw multiple scans. So based on if there are 8 different colors and I use multiple scans, this looks pretty good approximation of that. So I press OK and I close this. But the problem with this is each color is on a different layer. So this object is not very useful for me unless I merge all these different things in different colors into one. So instead of doing all of that, let's just redo the tracing. You can also just right click and trace bitmap. Let's just make a simple color quantization image. So it makes a black and white image which I can move away from the, let's just keep it on top of it. So let me reduce the, go to the fill and stroke toolbar, let me reduce the opacity of this so I can see the original image beneath it. So if I click the nodes tool, you can see that it has if I select all nodes, it has 1700 nodes. So this object is not, although it looks, it is a vector, but it's not a very useful vector because there's too much information, unnecessary information in it. One thing we can do is, if I go path and simplify, Control L is the shortcut, it makes the number of nodes much lesser. So if I select all these nodes, 462, from 1700 to 462 is the number of nodes that it made. So right now this object is a little more usable. You can see that I can hold this and I can, so all of these nodes are merged into one object now. So if I want to break this module into its own independent thing compared to that module, you can go to path and break apart. So yeah, break apart. So now I can, I go to the select tool. I go to the select tool, I can select this. So right now everything is selected, but I can select this and move this and move whatever that is. So it's not perfect, but it's trying to do a good job. That's how it vectorizes your image for you. Anywhere where there are too many colors, it becomes a little too complicated for the software to trace. So that is the original image. This is the components that will be reconstructed into. Let's go ahead and move the original image away. What's the other way we can try and trace this manually? You can select the pencil tool and try drawing around it like that. Then it comes down to how good you are with your hand. But even this has quite a bit of nodes, a lot of which are unnecessary. You can delete them all by pressing delete. If I double click anywhere, you make a new node. So this is one way to do it. Nobody does it. The other way to do it is, let me delete this. I can use this Bezier curves tool. I can try to trace it. Even if it's imperfect, I can change the shapes later. This is one way to do it. The other way is to just drop nodes for now and just connect them with straight edges. We'll go back in later and edit these nodes. Select these two nodes, make them smooth. And if I press and change these shapes manually, so now it's starting to look more and more like the original image. It's a lot more perfect than the pencil drawing. Another way I can do is, if I think of these things as squares and circles, you can also just draw a circle with this as the center. So if I press shift, draws a circle with whatever point I started with as the center. Stroke style should be, let's say, thin strokes. I can draw a rectangle here, starting with this. Right. So now if I bring these two close enough, if I merge them, then I make that shape that I need, right? What is the way to do it? I select both of them. There's path, union. It's a Boolean operation. It merges these two things. And now here there's an extra node. You can just delete that. So you make this neat little object. This is the most perfect way of tracing that because it's a perfect shape. If it's not, then Bezier is the most general tool. So same with this one, I can make two concentric circles. Let's say I copy this over, then I move, pressing shift, makes two concentric circles. So when you have multiple objects on top of one another, so this one is on the top, the other one is on the bottom. So if I press page down, this goes to the bottom and this comes to the top. So that's the shortcut to do that. I can do a path difference and it makes this hollow looking thing. So if I can select these nodes here and delete them, path, break apart. I can also delete line segments between points. So that's how I get the top part. And the bottom is, this one is just another rectangle. So you can do multiple things like that. So I would give you 10 minutes. Try and trace all the aspects of this image. So I don't need the left hand of this image, it's too complicated to trace. So one thing I forgot to show you is how to crop a raster image or even a vector on Inkscape. How do I crop stuff? So there's no way to crop these pixels away because Inkscape doesn't see pixels. One way to do is to draw something else on it and tell Inkscape to hide it. Right, so if I draw this, I select this as well as the original object. I right click and say create a clip, set clip. Everything that is there in the only in the rectangle shows up. So you can make the rectangle go here instead. So I can manually rescale it. And so if you notice, the rectangle should be on the top. If I remove the opacity, if I remove the transparency, you'll understand. So you want this thing. So this thing is the thing we see through to see the object below it. That's how it works. So I set clip and I see the cropped image. So I can work on this more carefully. So this is before you leave today. What you want to do is just trace out this in whatever way you felt comfortable. So there's 4 things that I taught you. You can try all 4 of them. So if you have 10 minutes extra time, if you don't have any questions, there's some extra features that I can go into. So let's say I want to color this in a gradient. So in the fill, you can see there's gradient. What it does, it takes existing colors and converts them into gradients. Another, if you want your own gradient from, let's say, red to blue, I can select this tool here that says gradients. Each point I select, I can set a color for my own. So I select this point, make it blue, and the opacity really high. So I can make something like a thermometer, so red to blue. I can also have opacities in terms of gradients in terms of opacity. So if I select the gradient tool again, make this transparent. You can have the same color. So if I want the same color here and here, and I don't want to select it manually, you can copy this code here, put it here. So now you have the same color. Then you manually adjust the transparency. It's just a transparent to blue color. You can also change the gradient to a linear or a circular one. So when you click on this, you have to draw another gradient in order to see the effect of this. So when you double click, you will see the gradient that it's using right now. Another thing that I never covered till now was anytime I select object, it says it's a path or it's a circle, but it's in layer 1. So what are these layers? If I go to layer, there's a toolbar, layers, shift control L. I can add a new layer, say layer and take this particular object into the layer above it. If I hide everything else, I can see only this object, right? So let's say I want these 2 objects. So if I press shift and page out, it will take it to a new layer. You can see that it's moving here. If I select it, shift page down, it moves to another layer. Another thing I can do with layers is have a layer wide opacity, which is adjusted here. There's also other options here to blend, and let's try a different color for this. So if it has a red color, if I use a blend mode, you can get a lot of new things happening here. You can do a lot of cool stuff with the whole layer. Depending on where I take this, I see a different thing. So that's the advantage with layers. But the best use of layers is if you are doing multiple things, you can keep this parent object in a different layer. Everything that you build on it can be in a different layer. That's the easiest way to keep track of all the stuff. So I've done a lot of operations here. If I want to undo one, I do Control Z. But if I want to undo the last 5 or 10 operations, there's a toolbar for that. It's called history toolbar. So if I say view, edit. So the shortcut is Control Shift H for the history toolbar. You can see that operations are merged into similar looking operations. So you can just either undo one at a time or undo a whole block of operations. You just click on it, it goes back in history. That's why it's called the history toolbar. So all the toolbars come here on the right. If you want to hide one of them, it's a toggle. It's not a toggle. Okay, so you can just click on any toolbar you want. And now I want to export this whole thing as an image. So go to export a PNG image and selection. Just export it to desktop. So it has exported the image that we drew on top of it. The last thing in the last 3 minutes that I'll cover is, so I'll take an existing image from a research paper and I'll show you how you can make it editable. So a PDF is a vector format. You did not know. I'll open my file again. So let's say I take a research paper. I drag and drop it into Inkscape. So it asks me which page I want. Let's say page 2. So it takes some time, but when it finally loads, so let's zoom into one of these things. So I'm interested in this graph here. So even if this is a graph that you made, so this is a group of objects. It's saying I selected a group of objects. If I double click, I enter the group. I can select objects within this group. I select these two things, move them across. Let's ignore the rest of everything. Press 3 and zoom into it. So I take these graphs. I have this point. I want all the brown looking points here, and I want to change the shape to circle, let's say. So one easy thing I can do is, if I right click, select same, fill color. Okay, let's say select same object type. Oh, so this is a path of 4 nodes. It is selecting everything that's a path. And change the color. You can see everything that is selected. can change the color of all of them uniformly, and you can, let's say, remove the stroke. You only see the fill now. If you want to do the same for those, you have to use filter to select those as well. Okay, select same everything of this black triangle. Yeah, so if I want to change the text here, I can just grab the text, delete it, type new text, things like that. Not all PDFs render very well, but there's there's a lot of things. So suppose I make my own graph using MATLAB or whatever software I use, or even Excel. If I export it as a PDF, if I want to edit minor things in it after I make the graph, I can bring it into Inkscape, import a PDF, and then change stuff and save it again. So a lot of people in my lab, they use this to make their figures look really publish worthy, because the software that makes the graphs is not any whichever software you use, it's not good by itself. People use Python R to make graphs, but then they tweak all of the graphs using Inkscape. Alright guys, so that's it for today. Please don't forget to leave the feedback for this workshop, and make sure if you were not able to complete any of these exercises that I have given you, it's a good idea to go back and do it tonight at your home, so you feel really comfortable with using Inkscape once you've done all those exercises. So thank you guys, have a good day.